Hello everyone, this is Gene and I'm back with a new video. I hope everybody's well. Um, I can't say I'm well, but I guess as the song says, I'm closer to fine. As the days pass, it gets a little bit easier, and I'm still adjusting to my new circumstances. The quiet is probably the biggest thing. At times, it's very, I guess, comforting, and then there are times when the silence really is deafening, in particular at night, especially when I have too much time to think and I start realizing that this is the first time in my life that I've ever truly lived on my own, right? There's always been someone home when I get home and all that stuff, and now it's just me and the cat. So um, I get used to it and then I think too much about it and all that stuff. But I was just realizing that this coming week, the 15th, tomorrow, is officially 1 month out from what would have been my mother's 59th birthday had she lived, because her birthday is in September. And then 2 days after that is the 17th, which is what ultimately ended up being her last time she went into the hospital a month ago. So July 17th is when she went into the hospital for what ended up being the final time. And then, of course, the week after that, the 24th and the 25th, which of course are the day she more or less died, because she was brain dead on July 24th, and then the 25th is when they officially declared her dead. So it's like a very somber month anniversary is coming up. And then on top of all that, you have what later on this month is the death of Aaliyah, and then about 2 weeks after that, you have 9/11. So this time of the year is not a happy time for me, and now it's even less happy. But I guess that's what it is, right? Life is a triumph and a tragedy. But enough about me. I wanted to just briefly cover my thoughts on the She-Hulk trailers that I've seen and on Halle Bailey's comments about being cast as the Black Ariel, right, the Black Little Mermaid. These are topics that I usually would have just made separate videos for, but given that I'm very, very busy these days and I don't get a chance to really make a lot of videos anymore, at least at the moment, I figured I would just take some time and just try to briefly cover these 2 points. I still have a video that I have to make about some drama about Anne Frank, of all folks, and privilege because Twitter. But it is a topic that I did agree to talk about, and I will be doing that video. I don't know when, but I'll be doing it. But I just wanted to just sort of briefly cover this. So this is a clip from Culture Crave of Bruce Banner and Jennifer Walters discussing Steve Rogers being a virgin, because this is what you need two superheroes to be talking about. But I saw this on Heel versus Babyface's video yesterday when I was doing some chores, and it hit me what I don't like about the MCU She-Hulk, aside from the fact that um, it's not really comics accurate, right? They draw some visuals or images from the comics. Like there's one ad I've seen where Jen is like sitting on a bench and it shows She-Hulk. It's obviously from like a cover from like the mid 2000s, or the Lady Justice one, right? Apparently they have used that or are considering using that as like a promo image. So they use that stuff, but let's be honest, if you're a She-Hulk fan, and She-Hulk has been around since 1980, so she's been around for 42 years now, right? Um, the character, from what I've seen of these various clips, is not the character that I grew up reading about, grew up watching when she would make appearances in certain cartoons like the Hulk show from back in the day, or more recent ones like, what was it, Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, or whatever it was. Right, so it's not the She-Hulk I know. And I won't be watching this show or covering it all that much. But in watching this clip, I realized what I did not like about this version of She-Hulk. I'm going to play this clip and then I'm going to sort of explain my frustration with the clip and with this MCU version of She-Hulk. Come on, watch again. Let's hope it plays.
So, back to what I was saying before. My theory. Steve Rogers did not have a girlfriend before he went into the service.
Says who?
The History Channel. So he becomes Captain America, and from that moment on, a symbol of America, he is rushed to the front lines, he becomes a war hero. Then he is frozen in ice.
Right.
So, based on everything you've told me, after he gets unfrozen, he goes from world-threatening disaster to world-threatening disaster. That's when he's not a fugitive from the law, right? So it seems like he was pretty busy.
All you're doing is repeating everything that I've already told you about my friend and colleague.
Obviously, Captain America was a virgin. Out!
So there's the clip. I don't know how well it played on the video. I will certainly link it, and you guys can watch it on your own if you haven't seen it already. Let me explain to you what I have my issue with that clip. That is probably the most uncool thing I've ever seen any version of She-Hulk do. And that is what absolutely bugs me. This version of She-Hulk, from everything I've seen of her, is not cool. She's not fun, she's not flirty, she's not assertive. For me, there's nothing appealing about this character, right? Now, to be fair, I do think that's very intentional on the part of the creators and the writers and all that. They obviously want to do this whole, she hates being She-Hulk and she feels uncomfortable in She-Hulk form, which is, again, the complete opposite of the character from the comics. Jen hates being Jen. She can't stand being Jen Walters because Jen is mousy and frumpy and normal, and She-Hulk is her personal empowerment fantasy. To the point where there's a story, I think, when she's part of the Fantastic Four, taking Ben Grimm's place for a time, when she gets hit with some sort of science-y ray thing. I was never a fan of the Fantastic Four, sorry. Sciencey heroes just don't really appeal to me. But she gets hit with some sort of ray or whatever while they're out in space, and more or less it's discovered that for a long time, this eventually gets changed, but for a long time she was unable to switch between Jen and She-Hulk. She was She-Hulk all the time. She couldn't turn it off, as it were. And she loved it because she finally got to be this power fantasy 24/7 all day long, right? And this version seems to be that, similar to Hulk, right? She's uncomfortable with, at least at first, she's uncomfortable with this form. She doesn't like it. And from what I've seen of the clips, they don't understand that Jen and She-Hulk are supposed to be two different personas kind of residing in one body. They seem to have this idea, or their version of She-Hulk is that it's just Jen with a different look, right? Oh, it's Jen, but she's taller. It's Jen, but she's green. It's Jen, but she's very muscular and has superpowers. That, according to the comics, even the terrible comics that were written by Mariko Tamaki and Jason Aaron in more recent years, even those comics still established that there was a clear division between Jennifer Walters and She-Hulk. Right? They are two distinctly different personas, right? It's not just a look, right? For example, most of us have changed our appearance, whether we wanted to or not, over the years of our lives. We've changed hairstyles, maybe our skin tone changes. I know mine does, depending on the weather, right? We've all changed in height over the years. We weren't always as tall as we may currently be. right? Our weight certainly has fluctuated throughout our lives, right? So a lot of us have gone through these changes with our body and with our visual presentation, our external presentation to the world, right? But for most of us, the core element of who we are doesn't change all that much. If you're an introvert, it doesn't matter whether you're dark skinned or light skinned, or if your hair is black or blonde or green, or whether you're, uh, you know, 4 foot tall or you're 5'7" or you're 6 foot. It doesn't matter if you're very strong and muscular, or if you're slim, or if you're heavy set, or whatever it is. Whatever state your body is in, or whatever you look like, does not change the fact that you're an introvert and you don't like being around people all that much. Speaking as an introvert, right? And that's not going to change about you just because your external presentation changes, right? But with She Hulk, it's different. She is distinctly a different person in every way than Jen Walters, right? She Hulk is fun. She's flirty. She's outgoing, right? Very exuberant, right? Constantly searching for adventure. Jen is not those things. And this version seems to be, oh, Jen is the same no matter what. She just looks different in this superpowered form, which is typically how superpowered forms don't work if you think about it. Whether you look at Hulk, right? Hulk typically is not the same as Bruce Banner. You even look at things like, say, She-Ra or He-Man, right? Those superpowered, idealized hero forms are not always the same in personality as the person, right? They might be close in personality, right? For example, might be both distinctly heroic, right? But they're not always the 100% the same, right? That's sort of the idea, right? Because the empowerment fantasy, the power fantasy inherent in that superhero form is not meant to be the same as the normal form, which is powerless in most situations. But that's not the version that they're going with, right? But as I said before, this version of Jen that I've seen thus far is completely uncool to me. As we see here, this clip shows her playing into every stereotype about women, whether it's women being bad drivers, whether it's women obsessing over a man's sexual history. And keep in mind, it's probably one of the few times where I'm actually on MCU Hulk's side on this because I'm not a big fan of Mark Ruffalo. But remember, especially in the comics, Jen and Bruce, and to be fair, I don't think the comics ever did this well either, so I really can't get too mad at the show. But in the comics, Jen and Bruce are supposed to be cousins who have a relationship that is very sibling like, right? So they're cousins, but they're supposed to be as close as brother and sister. I would never in my life, and I have never in my life discussed or asked my brother about another man's sexual history or what he knows about that. I have never in my life, and I would never in my life, ask my brother about a friend of his, right? Someone he knows and works with, and ask him what that person's uh, sexual history is or what their love life is like. I would never in my life ask that information. And if for some reason he like started to tell me about it, I'd be like, yo, I am not the person to discuss this with. Fortunately, my brother knows to not have those type of conversations with me. So, as an older sibling, as a woman who has a younger brother, this just rings very odd to me because it's not a conversation I'd ever have with my brother about any of his friends or coworkers, and it's not something he would ever volunteer. Right? It's one thing to talk to your siblings about your work or certain people at your work or what they do, but to start inquiring about their sex lives is like that's weird, or their sexual history. That's weird. I can't even think of a time in the comics when Jen's ever inquired about Steve Rogers' love life or his sex life. Because I can't see her doing that unless she had some sort of interest in him, which I don't recall her ever having an interest in him in that way. I mean, she might have. It's been 40 some years of comics. A lot of things happen, but I can't think of any comic I ever read where she had an interest in Steve Rogers. But that's all that. But this clip shows just how uncool the character is. It does not help her. She's supposed to be the heroine of the show. She's supposed to be the lead. And you have her getting into a car crash of her own doing, right? And this is supposed to be her origin story, right? Because this is supposed to be, they crash and they somehow end up outside the car, and apparently she gets some of his blood on her arm, and this is how she becomes She-Hulk, which is nowhere close to how she becomes She-Hulk in the comics. For those who don't know or are not familiar, Jen in the comics is a criminal lawyer, criminal defense attorney. She's defending a member of the mob, a mob boss who doesn't like her, right? Orders a hit on her. The mobsters go shoot up her car. She gets shot. Bruce Banner happens to be visiting, and he tells her his secret about being Hulk. And when she gets shot, he happens to be there, and he has to make the decision to either give her a blood transfusion and save her life, or at least hopefully save her life long enough for her to get to a hospital, or not give her the blood transfusion and let her die, because he knows that if he doesn't do something, there's no way she's even going to live long enough for the ambulance to even get there, let alone get to the hospital. So he makes the choice to give her a blood transfusion. He gives her an emergency blood transfusion. And, he hopes that she'll get to the hospital and make it. And he understands that he's now, in his opinion, cursed her with being the Hulk, right? Or having Hulk-like powers. Of course, ultimately, her experience being a Hulk is very different from his, but naturally, how is he going to know at that point, right? All he knows is that his cousin, whom he loves like his sister, has just been shot, and he's just trying to make, this very morally difficult decision, right, about what he can do and whether she lives or dies, depending on what he does, right? So that's her origin story, right? Hardworking attorney targeted by the mob. Gets saved by an emergency blood transfusion from her cousin. And then when the mobsters come back when she's in the hospital, because they find out that she didn't die, they try to kill her again. And it's actually their second attempt on her life that actually triggers her first She-Hulk transformation in the comic. In fact, it's in the comic when the guys are attacking her and one of them shouts, it's like she's a She-Hulk! And that's where the name actually comes from, right? So it's her origin in the comics, or rather the origin of her powers, I should say, in the comics, is very different than what we see here. And what frustrates me about this is that for people who watch this show who are not familiar with the history of the comics, which will be many, right? I don't expect, generally speaking, the audience to be watching this show to be familiar with the history of a character who has existed for over 40 years now. For many of them, they're going to trust that this show is based on the comics. They're going to trust that this is comics accurate, right? That this car crash and all this stuff is what happened in the comics, and it's not. And that's probably what frustrates me the most. There are going to be people who watch this show and think, oh, this is the official accurate story. Think about it. None of us ever question, for example, if the origin of Batman, his origin story, his parents getting murdered by Joe Chill, going through an alley, after they watch a movie, is ever accurate to the comics, right? None of us ever doubt that. None of us watch a movie or TV show based on the Batman comics and think, oh, this origin may not be accurate to the comics. We all just take it on faith, right? And that's what's going to happen here. Viewers who are not familiar with the character, because she's never had a big name like Batman, are going to take it on faith that this is indeed her origin story, that there is little to no difference between this and what happened in the comics, and their faith in this case is misplaced. And this is probably one of the things that irks me the most. It's not just a new version of She-Hulk. It will influence how people unfamiliar will view the original version, right, of She-Hulk. They're being sold a lie. They're being told a lie, in my opinion, and they won't know it because they don't know the history of the character, and no one's going to demand that they suddenly, smarten themselves up before they watch the show. So there's that. But this clip in general, right, just makes her look totally uncool. It would be different if you had this clip, but instead of Bruce and Jen having this silly conversation, it was instead, just two random fanboys or a fanboy and a fangirl, and they're talking about whether or not Cap ever had sex or had a girlfriend, and then they veer off the road and all that. And then you have Bruce and Jen come in and rescue them. That would look cool. Right? You have this scene play out, but you have the literal heroes be heroes and rescue these regular people from this terrible situation. That, in my opinion, would be a better introduction, because these trailers are meant to introduce you to the characters and get you interested in the show. For me, that would have been a much better introduction and truer to who She-Hulk is than this, oh, let me play up to every negative stereotype about women. Let me be obsessed about the sex life of a man that I'll never meet. Oh, let me be a terrible driver and cause a crash. I would have rather see her be heroic than, quite frankly, whatever the hell this was. But in summary, this version of She-Hulk, for me, is completely uncool. And I cannot deal with uncool. I can deal with a lot, but not an uncool She-Hulk. An uncool Jen Walters, fine. She's meant to be uncool. Uncool She-Hulk? Nope. I reject. I refuse. So there's that. So there is that. So now, on to the next thing. Which is Halle, is it Haley or Halle? Halle Bailey's comments about the race swap criticisms of her being, the cast as Ariel in this live action remake of The Little Mermaid, right? And the whole representation argument, which is something I've covered in other videos. Right now, I will be mainly using the Bounding article to sort of respond and sort of build my ideas around. To be clear, I have read the Variety interview. I'm just using the Bounding article because the Bounding article specifically mentions the parts that I want to address. The Variety article is longer. It goes into a lot of other parts of her career, which for what I want to talk about are unrelated, and therefore I don't need to address. Right? So I know everybody, I should say, I know not everyone likes or trusts Bounding. Fair enough. But from what I've read, I haven't seen anything that is untrue in this article. And again, it captures the parts that I want to address, so that's why I'm using it. I will include the link to the Variety article, so you guys can look this up yourselves if you want to. Right? But here's the thing. It says, Disney's live-action The Little Mermaid star Halle Bailey responds to race swap criticisms. The reassurance that little girls just like me should be princesses was something I needed as a kid. With all due respect, young lady, you're 22 years old. You had Tiana. You had the Princess and the Frog. Closest I ever got to someone who looked like me in the Disney films proper was Pocahontas, who looked nothing like me. But the closest character Disney ever made to anyone who was like me was actually Elisa from Gargoyles, and even then, the only thing is that we're both non-white biracial women who happen to be black on mom's side and a native on dad's. Otherwise, again, Elisa is nothing like me. right? But this whole thing, princesses, that little girls just like me should be princesses, was something I needed as a kid, and it's something you got as a kid because you're younger. I was 15 when you were born. You had the Princess and the Frog. You got what you wanted. But anyway, right? It says here that she was able to weather the negative reception by believing her casting would be a huge win for black representation, which you literally grew up with because you had Princess and the Frog. I didn't have that, right? But it says here that uh, she explained to Variety writer Angelique Jackson that one of the major reasons she felt honored to be cast as Disney's iconic redheaded mermaid was because she wanted the little girl in me and little girls just like me who are watching to know that they're special and that they're a princess in every single way. And that's beautiful. That's a wonderful thing. But here's my issue with it, right? First of all, like I said, she had that in Tiana, right? In Princess and the Frog, which is not a film that existed during the 90s Renaissance, which is when I grew up. Right, I went from the age of 4 to 14 in a decade, from 1989 to 1999. That's the Disney Renaissance. So, this was a part of my life, my part of my lived experience, which is why I'm covering this. Even though the Little Mermaid is actually my least favorite of the Disney films, of the films of that era, it's still something that I grew up with, and so I want to set the record straight. As a moody, middle aged 90s kid, I want to set the record straight, right? And here's what sort of bugs me about what she says here. I think it's a positive motivation, I think it's a noble intent. However, however, what Disney and what Hollywood in general has done is that they have traded relatability for representation. Let me explain what I mean. I compare it. I was just thinking about this morning too. I compare it to um, like job descriptions, right? In my work, I have to look over job descriptions and make sure the language is right, make sure that nothing that could possibly get the school in trouble is in there. But job descriptions are written ideally they are written according to the job, right? So certain jobs are going to have very broad job descriptions, very sort of broad language because it's a job where the skills necessary are fairly common, right? And then you have job descriptions that are going to be very detailed because the job is very specialized and not many people are going to have the skill set required. For example, the job description for a custodial assistant is written very differently than the job description for a professor of computer science, right? Being a professor of computer science is very specialized. It's very specific. You need a particular major, work history, research, right? All this stuff, which is not a common skill or a common thing, even in academia. Whereas the skill set or history needed for being a custodial assistant is much more broad and common, right? Most people have held a broom and mopped. Most people have, held a broom and swept or used a mop, right? Most people have some experience with cleaning, right? So one job description is going to be very broad, and one job description is going to be very specialized. Now I bring this up because I think that this is the difference, or highlights the difference between representation and relatability. Representation is like that very specific job description for a professor. You have to have certain characteristics or you don't qualify, whether it be the character, whether it be the viewer, right? So now they are changing Ariel, in my opinion, they are changing Ariel's race because now their qualifications for the character or for their work have changed. They've gone from the sort of broad description of relatability, where it was a character's personality or their experiences that endeared fans and whatnot to the work. And now they've gone to this very specialization, right, approach with representation. And now they're more or less auditing all of their old work, in particular from the 1990s heyday, and they're looking back and they're going, okay, does this measure up to our new standards that we implemented 30 years later? Does this meet the specialization that we have now? And if it doesn't meet that, which oftentimes it won't meet that, they decide to change it, right? So in this case, they decided, well, Ariel being a light-skinned redhead does not meet our current specialized standards for a lead female character in a movie. So instead of making a new movie set in Atlantis with a different family and coming up with an original character and story and all that, we're just going to fix Ariel in post 30 years later. And we're going to now make her fit these new qualifications that did not exist at the time the original film was made, which would have been the mid late 80s, and then released in 1989. Which, whether they intend to or not, means that all the work that the storyboarders, the artists, the designers, the people like, who was it, Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, who came up with the musical numbers, I should say. Now you're saying that all of their work was wrong. Think about it, even with the voice acting, right? Because Haley's going to be the speaking voice, and to my knowledge, the singing voice for this new version of Ariel. Which means that, in a very retroactive way, they're saying, at least in my opinion, they're saying that casting Jodie Benson, a white woman, as the original speaking and singing voice for Ariel was wrong. And we see this, increasingly in even voice acting work, right? This whole idea that, if you're black, you must voice black. If you're Asian, you must voice Asian, right? You can't uh, go outside the lines anymore. And if you're white, you don't get to have any roles. But this is what Disney has done. They have traded the mass appeal, right, of relatability for representation. So what happens is that, aside from just antagonizing, right, people like myself and many other fans, right, they narrow their applicant pool in a sense. They narrow their audience because now they are marketing on these very specific characteristics that not everybody is going to fit. And even those who do fit may not necessarily feel that this is necessary, right? So again, it's one of those, in my opinion, bad creative decisions. Ariel doesn't need to be race lifted, and in a broader sense, these live action remakes shouldn't be happening. I saw the Beauty and the Beast one in 2017, and I literally arrived in the. I literally went to the Magic Johnson Theater in Harlem to watch that movie, and I literally arrived in my seat for like 2.5 hours. I went right after work. I still want my $17 back. I hated that film because everything that I knew and loved about Beauty and the Beast as a movie was absent, right? Completely absent. Emma Watson didn't play Belle. Emma Watson played Emma Watson in Belle cosplay. Speaking of which, they ruined the ball gown. How do you do that? But anyway, I just want to say that, in particular, with this whole overcorrecting thing that Disney's doing with their live action remakes. The 1990s, and I said this on Twitter, in the 1990s, Disney was not hurting for brown skinned uh, representation, right? Well, they weren't hurting. Uh, Hello, come back. There we go. They weren't hurting for that back then. Because think about it. You had Jasmine, who's more or less Arabian, or at least Arabian influenced. Right? You had Jasmine in Aladdin, so that's 1992, third film in the Disney Renaissance. And then you have The Lion King, right? You have Nala. She's a cat, right? So you have that. Then when you get back to the human princesses, you have Pocahontas in '95. Yes, I know the film wasn't exactly all that great, and yes, I know it wasn't exactly all that respectful to native culture, to the Powhatan culture. She still counts. She's still a Disney princess. So you had her, Native American, and then after that, you had um, Esmeralda from Hunchback of Notre Dame. So just for their films alone at that point, between '92 and '96, you had three brown skinned female leads and a brown furred cat. And then again, if you look at if you broaden your horizons and you look at the various cartoons Disney had out then, right, that they would add different characters like to the Aladdin cartoon, or of course, as I mentioned earlier, Lisa from Gargoyles, who is not white. She's not white at all, and neither is her voice actress. So you have that, or you can even look at films that came out a little later, like Hercules. Right now, while none of the lead characters are African American, you do have the supporting character of the Muses, right? The Greek chorus, who sing many of the songs, right? It's basically not Meg singing or Michael Bolton. They're probably singing the songs. And those characters are basically a throwback to, black church, soul, very 60s supremes, right? So you even had black representation in them because believe me, lines like "Bless my soul, Herc was on a roll" is not Greek. It's not ancient Greek. It's not modern Greek. It's not Orthodox Greek. You're not going to hear that in a Greek church. You will hear that all the time, though, in a black church or with black soul music, like, again, 60s soul, R&B, stuff like that. You listen to the Supremes or similar girl groups, and you will hear that. So even there was black representation. Disney wasn't lacking for black or brown representation in the 1990s or non-white representation in the 1990s. You're correcting a problem. Disney is correcting a problem that they never really had back then. I'm not saying they've never had issues with representation or respectful representation of certain cultures or characters. They have. They demonstrated that just recently with the live action Mulan film. They marketed that saying that it was going to be more culturally accurate and respectful than the 1998 film was, and they blew it. They offended the Chinese and the non-Chinese, the Asians and the non-Asians. Not many folks like that movie because it was unnecessary. And it was only, like surface Chinese, right? It wasn't actually accurate to any culture or time period from best I remember of the many, many, many reviews I watched of it, right? But to get back to my point a little bit of relatability, right? What I liked about the Disney films looking back on them was that they had characters I could relate to. Ariel is actually a character I never really liked because I couldn't relate to her as a child. As a kid, I remember watching it and going like, but why is she doing this? Why does she believe Ursula? I'm 6 and even I know she's lying. Why are you going to give up your voice for a boy who's not Batman? Like, this is the way my mind worked. So I never really related to her because I didn't understand her motivations. I'd never had that experience at the time of having a crush or first love and things like that. Belle, on the other hand, I really related to because, I like to read. Belle likes to read. Belle is sort of the outcast in her little town. I certainly felt like an outcast going to school and in my neighborhood and whatnot. She was very smart and had a very witty personality about her, and I like to believe at that age that I was the same way. I could see myself in her, right? I could see parts of her that I could relate to. Even with Mulan later on, right? That's like 1998, so I would have been like 13, right? I could relate to her because yeah, I was sort of like the resident tomboy, the only girl in a group of men, right? I felt more comfortable amongst men than I ever did amongst women. I always felt more comfortable doing dude stuff than I did traditionally female stuff. Or things like the beginning of Girl Worth Fighting For, right? For a long time now, we've been marching off to battle. I could relate to that just for the simple fact that at that age, they had you walking everywhere. I had to walk to school, walk home from school. They wouldn't let you take the elevators in the school, so you had to walk up the stairs and walk to every class. So I understood that feeling in my own way of being on a long march and hating it. Like, oh God, more stairs. When do the stairs end? And that's what I think made the films work. They were fun, they had generally positive messages. Most of them, of course, were these very, simple love stories, but they were also relatable. You could find elements of it in yourself that you could latch onto, that you could understand. And when you trade relatability for representation, you lose a lot of that, right? Not many people can latch on to being something that they're not, right? For example, I'll never be a man, right? Try as I might, I will never be a man. There are certain things about the male experience that I will never understand. I will never completely understand how the male mind works or how men see the world. But I can relate to a lot of life experiences, right? We can relate to, the ups and downs of life, right? We can relate to, first love, lost love, going to school, being the new kid, being the outcast, liking sports, and things of that nature. That's how I met some of my best friends at that time. We were all pro wrestling fans, right? We didn't need to be like each other. All we needed was something in common, and that's how I formed a lot of my friendships back then. That's how I form a lot of my friendships today. Commonality. Instead of demanding that I be like them and they be like me, we find something that despite our differences, we are really, really passionate fans of. And I wish that Disney and Marvel and all these other companies would sort of remember that. Remember what brought you to the dance. Remember what got you to this point. If the original films, if Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, all this other stuff are not hits back in the late 80s and early 90s, you don't get here to 2022 to ruin them needlessly. Right? But that's all I have to say about it. I know that I have rambled on for way too long, as I often do. I hope you're all having a good day. I have chores to get back to, but I just wanted to make this video, and hope you guys are doing well. And yeah, have a good day and night wherever you are. Bye.